I used to think silence meant peace. That if you kept your head down, worked hard, and spoke less, life would somehow stop hurting. I was wrong. Silence can be the loudest thing in a room when you've got too much inside your head. My name's Ethan. I'm 28. I wire homes for a living, electrician by trade, ghost by reputation. My co-workers call me the quiet spark. I show up, do the job, nod when someone cracks a joke, and disappear before the beer hits the table. It's not that I hate people. I just stopped knowing what to say to them. It's been 8 months since I moved to this side of Portland. I rent a one-bedroom above a laundromat that hums all night. My walls shake with the rhythm of spin cycles, and somehow, I've gotten used to it. I keep my tools lined up by size, the way my dad taught me before he stopped teaching altogether. My nights are the same: leftover takeout, a sketchbook I never show anyone, and the hum of the city below my window. That night started like any other. I finished a rewiring job on a duplex, wiped my hands on a rag that would never be clean again, and thought about skipping dinner. But something about the air felt heavy, like rain waiting to happen. I wanted light, warmth, something human, even if it came from a stranger. So, I walked to the cafe on 8th and Alberta, the one that smells like burnt espresso and cinnamon. The place was half empty. A couple on a laptop in the corner, a barista humming off-key, a college kid asleep on her open textbook. I sat near the window, same booth as always, ordered black coffee, no sugar. When it came, I wrapped my hands around the cup, let the heat sting a little. It made me feel alive. That's when I noticed her. She sat 2 tables over, back to the brick wall, sketchbook open, pencil moving fast. Her hair was pulled up in a messy knot, a few strands escaping like they refused to listen. She wore a faded denim jacket with small paint stains on the sleeves. There was something about the way she looked at people, like she wasn't just watching them, she was studying their quiet parts. At first, I didn't realize she was deaf. The clues came slowly. The barista called her name twice, Mara. Before walking over and tapping her shoulder. She looked up, smiled, nodded, and held up her phone for him to read something she'd typed. He read it, grinned, and walked off. She went back to her sketching like it was the only thing holding her together. I don't know why I couldn't look away. Maybe because I'd spent years surrounded by people who talked too much and said too little. And here was someone who said nothing and somehow filled the whole room. My coffee went cold before I realized I'd been staring too long. When she looked up, our eyes met. I froze. She didn't look away. She studied me the way an artist studies light, curious, precise, a little disarming. Then, without breaking eye contact, she tore a small piece of paper from her sketchbook, scribbled something on it, and slid it onto my table as she walked past to the counter. I hesitated before flipping it over. Her handwriting was neat, angled, confident. You look like you listen, even when no one's talking. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. I looked up, but she'd already sat back down, sketching again, pretending the note didn't exist. I wanted to say something, anything, but how do you talk to someone who can't hear? Do you write back? Do you gesture? Do you just smile like an idiot? I folded the note, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and told myself I'd leave. I didn't. When the rain started outside, soft, steady, Portland rain, I took my cup and moved to the table across from her. She noticed, glanced up, one eyebrow raised in question. I held out a napkin and a pen, wrote, "Is it okay if I sit here?" She read it, smiled slightly, then wrote back, "You already are." I laughed under my breath. She didn't hear it, but somehow she knew. We talked like that for almost an hour. Pen to napkin, napkin to pen. It felt old-fashioned and oddly intimate, like passing secrets in a classroom. I learned her name was Mara, that she was 26, that she illustrated small storybooks for children's publishers. She'd lost most of her hearing at 15 from a viral infection that took 3 months to steal what no one could replace. Silence, she wrote, doesn't come all at once. It fades. Like someone slowly turning the volume down on your world. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. She smiled like she appreciated that. When the cafe lights dimmed, the barista started stacking chairs. I stood, pulled out my wallet, and she shook her head, typing on her phone instead. A message popped up on my screen a second later. Mara, next time, I'll buy the coffee. You talk too much for someone who says nothing. I laughed again, and she caught it, saw it in the way my shoulders moved, the corners of my mouth lifted. She nodded like she'd won something. Then she gathered her sketchbook and slung her small backpack over one shoulder. Before leaving, she tore one last page from her book and slid it across my table. It was a quick sketch, me, sitting there with my coffee, looking out the window. My jawline was too sharp, my eyes too tired, but the expression, she'd gotten that right. It was the face of someone listening for a sound that would never come. By the time I looked up, she was gone. Outside, the rain had thickened into a curtain of gray. I stood under the awning, staring at the streetlight glow bouncing off puddles, sketch in one hand, coffee in the other. Her note still sat in my pocket, the paper warm from my body heat. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing her, her steady hands moving across paper, her eyes meeting mine like she already knew what I wouldn't say. I pulled out my old sketchbook from the drawer, the one I hadn't touched since college, and tried to draw her. But no matter how many times I started over, I couldn't capture her eyes. They weren't just watching. They were listening. The next evening, I went back. Same booth, same cup of black coffee. I told myself it was habit, not hope. But every time the door opened, I glanced up. I waited for the flash of denim, the messy hair, the quiet presence that made silence feel less like an absence and more like a language. She didn't come that night. Or the night after. By the third evening, I convinced myself she was just passing through, a traveler in my orbit for one quiet hour. But on the fourth night, when I walked in, she was there. Same table. Same seat. Her eyes lifted from her sketchbook like she'd been expecting me. I pointed to the chair across from her. She nodded. This time, she handed me a small notebook. Inside, 2 columns, her side and mine. She wrote, "It's easier this way. Less napkins to waste." I grinned, wrote back, "Good for the planet, bad for barista tips." She laughed silently, shoulders shaking, and for a moment, the whole room felt lighter. We didn't talk about big things that night. Just small ones. Favorite movies. The way rain sounds through glass. How she sometimes feels music through vibration when she presses her palm to the window during storms. She told me, "You don't need ears to feel rhythm. You just need to pay attention." When she wrote that, I didn't realize it yet, but she wasn't just talking about music. At closing time, she signed something with her hands. Slow, deliberate motions. I frowned, not understanding. She smiled, picked up her pen, and wrote, "See you tomorrow." I nodded before I could stop myself. That night, I walked home with her notebook still in my hand, realizing how strange it felt to have words you could hold. And for the first time in years, the silence in my apartment didn't feel empty. It felt like waiting. It became routine before I even realized it. Every evening, the same cafe, the same table, 2 cups of coffee, mine black, hers with too much sugar. We didn't make plans. We didn't text. We just showed up. Like something in both of us knew when it was time to listen again. Over the next 2 weeks, our conversations filled that little notebook until its spine began to bend. Her handwriting started neat, precise, but as the pages went on, it loosened, like her words were beginning to trust me. She'd hand me the notebook, watch me read, then wait for my reply with that quiet patience only people who've known silence can have. She told me about her art, how she illustrated bedtime stories but never liked to read them aloud. "I don't know how my voice sounds anymore," she wrote. "I remember vibrations, not tone." I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, really looked, and she smiled like that was enough. Sometimes, when she drew, she'd let me watch. I'd sit there, mesmerized by how her hand moved, confident and soft at the same time. Her sketches weren't perfect, they were alive. Full of breath and motion, like she drew not what she saw, but what she felt. Once, she caught me staring and wrote, "You look at people the way I draw them. Like you're afraid they'll disappear if you blink." That one stayed with me. One evening, the cafe was packed. Rain had turned into a thunderstorm, and everyone had crammed inside, escaping the cold. We sat closer than usual, shoulders almost touching. She had her notebook open, her pen tapping against the page, and then she wrote something that made me pause. "You listen better than anyone I know. But what are you listening for?" It hit deeper than she probably meant it to. I stared at her words, tracing the ink grooves with my thumb, trying to answer without saying too much. I wrote, maybe for something that finally makes sense. She read it, her expression softening. Then she signed something, slow, careful. She pointed to me, then to her chest, then made a circular motion near her heart. I didn't know what it meant, but the look in her eyes said it wasn't small. She laughed when she saw my confusion and wrote, "That means you think too much." I laughed too, and for a moment, the storm outside didn't matter. When the cafe closed early because of the power flicker, she didn't leave right away. We stood under the awning, watching the rain flood the street. She signed something again, hands fluttering gently like wings, and then typed on her phone. "Mara, want to see something?" She led me through the rain, across 2 blocks, to a narrow alley behind an old art supply store. There was a staircase leading up to a rooftop, slick with water. She climbed first, moving fast and sure-footed, while I followed, pretending I wasn't worried about slipping. At the top, the city stretched out before us. Neon signs blurred in puddles of light, and the sound of rain softened into a kind of rhythm. She walked to the edge, spread her arms out, face tilted toward the sky. "This," she wrote on her phone, holding it up for me, "is my concert." She pressed her palms against the railing, feeling the vibration of raindrops hitting metal. Her eyes closed, her lips parted just slightly, and for the first time, I understood what she meant by feeling music. The city, the rain, the distant thunder, it all moved through her like a song no one else could hear. When she opened her eyes, she saw me watching and smiled shyly, almost embarrassed. I shook my head, wrote on the back of a receipt I had in my pocket, "It's beautiful." She took the paper, read it, then stepped closer. For a moment, we stood in silence, faces inches apart, rain between us. She lifted her hand slowly, touched her fingers to my lips, not in a romantic way, but like she was memorizing the shape of sound. Then she placed her hand on her own chest, feeling her heartbeat. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there while her eyes searched mine like she was listening through them. Then, softly, she signed a few words I didn't know, before typing on her phone again. "You talk loud without saying a word." When she said that, I swear the city around us went quiet. That night, when I got home, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. The rain, her hands, the warmth of her touch. I found myself opening the sketch she gave me again, the one of me at the cafe. I traced her pencil lines, feeling the indent of her strokes, like maybe she'd left a piece of herself in the graphite. I started sketching too, something I hadn't done in years. I drew her face, not perfectly, but the way she looked when she was lost in silence. I tried to draw her eyes, but like before, I couldn't. They weren't just eyes. They were listening. The next evening, she didn't show up. Neither did she the next day. I tried telling myself it didn't matter, that maybe she was busy or away. But the cafe felt empty without her quiet energy. Every sound, the clink of cups, the hiss of steam, felt wrong, like an unfinished song missing its rhythm. On the 5th day, I walked to the art supply store, hoping maybe I'd see her there. The woman at the counter recognized her when I asked. "Mara," she said. "Yeah, she comes in a lot. Sweet girl. Think she's working on a children's book about sound and silence." She paused. "But I haven't seen her since last week." That night, I sat by my window again, city lights flickering outside, sketchbook open, pages covered in half-finished drawings of her face. I realized how strange it was to miss someone you'd barely known, a handful of coffees, a few scribbled notes, a silent rooftop. I thought about messaging her, but I didn't have her number. We'd never exchanged one. Just that notebook, the one she'd kept. All our conversations, gone with her. Days passed. Then, one evening, I walked into the cafe, not expecting anything, and there she was. She was sitting by the window again, sketchbook open, a faint smile playing on her lips. But something was different. Her eyes looked tired, like she hadn't slept much. When she saw me, she waved. I sat down, heart pounding in relief, and she slid a new notebook across the table. On the first page, she'd written, "Sorry I disappeared. I had to go home for a bit." I wrote back, "I thought you got tired of my bad handwriting." She smiled, shook her head, and wrote, "Never. But I needed to be with my mom. She's sick." I froze for a second. She saw it, nodded slightly, and kept writing. "It's not new. She's been sick for a while. I go when it gets worse. She can't speak anymore either. I guess silence runs in the family." I didn't know how to reply. My pen hovered over the page until I finally wrote, "I'm sorry. Is she okay now?" She paused, eyes softening, and wrote, "No one ever really is. But she's resting." For the rest of the evening, we didn't write much. We just sat there. Sometimes words aren't big enough for the things that hurt. She'd look out the window, I'd sip my coffee, and between us, silence did the talking. Before leaving, she flipped to the last page of the notebook and drew something, two figures sitting across from each other, one holding a coffee, the other holding a pencil. At the bottom, she wrote, "We hear each other just fine." She left before I could write back. That night, I stayed up sketching her again, but this time, I didn't try to get her eyes right. I drew them closed, peaceful, listening to a world I still couldn't hear. And I realized something that scared me. Somewhere between our scribbled pages and shared silence, I had fallen for her. The next time I saw Mara, it wasn't at the cafe. It was 2 weeks later, on a cloudy Sunday morning when the city felt half awake. I was at the grocery store, buying the same things I always did, instant coffee, bread, and a microwave meal I'd pretend was dinner. I was halfway down the cereal aisle when I heard someone laugh quietly behind me. It wasn't a sound, it was a movement. A small breath of joy. I turned, and there she was, holding a basket of apples and smiling like she'd caught me somewhere I didn't belong. I smiled back, a little too fast. She walked over, tilted her head, and typed something on her phone. "Mara, you buy the same cereal every week. Do you even like it?" I laughed, pulling out my phone to reply. "Ethan, I like routine. Keeps the world predictable." She typed again. "Predictable isn't always living." We stood there for a moment, two people surrounded by shelves of quiet plastic packaging and soft background music. Then she reached into her basket, pulled out an apple, and handed it to me. Her hand brushed mine, warm, steady. On her phone, another message appeared. "You should come by sometime. My mom likes company." I froze. It wasn't a casual invitation. There was something about the way her eyes lingered on mine, a quiet plea that said she didn't just want company, she needed someone to understand. I nodded. "Tomorrow?" I mouthed. She smiled, relief flickering through her expression, and typed, "Tomorrow." Her apartment was nothing like I expected. It was small, but filled with color. Paintings leaned against walls, notebooks stacked in uneven towers, the air faintly smelling of acrylic and lemon tea. Light filtered through pale curtains, landing on sketches taped to every surface. She opened the door, motioning for me to come in, and signed something with her hands, probably "welcome," though I wasn't sure. I just smiled and nodded. Then I saw her mother. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, hair thin and silver. A small oxygen machine hummed beside her. Her eyes, though tired, held a calm that felt almost sacred. Mara touched her shoulder gently, and her mother turned, smiled faintly at me, and waved. Mara handed her a notebook, and the older woman wrote something down before passing it to me. "Thank you for visiting my daughter. She doesn't bring people home." I smiled, wrote back, "Thank you for having me." She read it, her lips forming a silent thank you, and for a moment, I saw where Mara got her gentleness from. The same stillness. The same eyes that listened even when no sound filled the air. Mara set a cup of tea in front of me, then sat down across the small table. She began to write. "Mom lost her voice years ago. Cancer. I was 15 when I lost my hearing, so we sort of met in silence halfway. I didn't know what to say." I looked at her mother again, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the soft wheeze of the machine beside her. Mara wrote more. "We used to fight about everything. Music, friends, school. Then one day, the noise stopped for both of us. We stopped talking, but we started listening." I nodded slowly, feeling something tighten in my chest. Her mother smiled at us, as if she could sense the rhythm of our conversation even without hearing it. She gestured toward the window, where the sky had started to shift from gray to amber. Mara got up, adjusted the curtains, and her mother reached out to squeeze her hand. That moment, just that small touch, said everything. When her mother dozed off, Mara motioned for me to follow her into another room. It was her studio. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, some halfway done, all vibrant with color. In the center stood an easel holding a large piece covered by a thin cloth. She hesitated before pulling it away. It was a painting of her mother, eyes closed, hand resting over her heart, surrounded by waves of color radiating outward, almost like sound made visible. I stepped closer, my breath catching. The details were soft but alive, the small lines at the corners of her mother's eyes, the way light seemed to move through the paint. "She doesn't hear anymore," Mara wrote on her notepad. "But she still feels when I paint near her. I think colors speak where words can't." I looked at her, and for the first time, I wanted to tell her everything I'd never said, about my father, the nights filled with unspoken arguments, how silence became a habit I never broke. But I didn't. I just nodded, because somehow she already knew. She stepped closer, picking up another painting from the floor. It was different, abstract shapes swirling into each other, dark blues fading into light gold. In the middle, faintly, two silhouettes sat facing one another over coffee cups. "That's us," she wrote. I looked at it, smiling softly. "You made me look less tired," I mouthed. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. Then she wrote, "You look tired in real life. Here, you look like someone who's learning to listen again." The room went quiet. Just the hum of the oxygen machine in the next room, the soft ticking of rain against glass. I wanted to say something, anything, but she reached out before I could. Her fingers brushed mine, light, tentative. Then she guided my hand toward her sketchbook, placing it flat against a page she'd just drawn, a simple line across paper, soft curves meeting in the middle. She wrote under it, "Do you know what this is?" I shook my head. "It's a heartbeat." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. She added another line beneath it, smaller, broken halfway through. "And this is silence." Then she looked up at me, eyes steady, and wrote, "Sometimes they mean the same thing." I didn't understand then what she meant, not fully. But I would, soon. We spent hours there, the light outside turning gold, then violet, then fading altogether. Her mother slept in the next room, her breathing slow and uneven. Mara painted while I sat nearby, occasionally handing her brushes or wiping paint from her fingers. She didn't need music. Her rhythm came from the soft strokes of her hand and the rise and fall of her mother's breath. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. She wrote one last thing in her notebook before handing it to me. "You don't have to fill silence with words, Ethan. Sometimes silence is the only thing honest enough to stay." I nodded, my voice caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. As I stepped into the hallway, she touched my sleeve gently, stopping me. She signed something, small movements, quick. I didn't understand, but she smiled sadly and mouthed, "Good night." I walked home through empty streets, the city lights reflecting on wet pavement. I didn't turn on any music, didn't call anyone, didn't even make coffee. I just sat by my window, holding her notebook in my hands, reading her words again and again until they felt like a part of me. That night, I dreamt of her painting, waves of color spreading through silence, her mother's face peaceful in the center. But when I woke, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. The next morning, I went back to her apartment. I knocked once, twice. No answer. The door was locked, curtains drawn. I waited, pacing the hallway, until a neighbor opened their door. "You looking for Mara?" the woman asked. "Yes," I said quickly. "Is she home?" The woman hesitated. "She left last night." "In a hurry." "I think she went to the hospital with her mother." My stomach sank. I spent that whole day waiting, by my phone, by the cafe, anywhere she might show up. But she didn't. By midnight, I walked to the rooftop we'd stood on weeks ago, the same one where she said the rain was her concert. The sky was clear now, stars faint against city light. I stood there for a long time, just listening. Not for sound, but for something else. Maybe the echo of her touch. The rhythm of her silence. And when the wind moved past, soft and cold, it almost sounded like her laughter, wordless, quiet, but full of life. Hospitals have a kind of silence that feels different from the rest of the world. It isn't peaceful. It's heavy, humming with the sound of machines and the kind of waiting that has no end. The air smells like antiseptic and heartbreak. I stood at the reception desk, palms sweating, trying to explain who I was. "I'm a friend," I said. "Mara. She's here with her mother, I think." The nurse checked the list, nodded, and pointed down a long corridor. "Room 217, she said quietly. My shoes echoed on the linoleum floor as I walked. Every door I passed had a story behind it. Some of them were ending, some were still being written. When I reached the door, I paused. Through the glass, I could see her sitting beside the bed, holding her mother's hand. Her shoulders were still, but her head was bowed, eyes closed. The machine beside the bed blinked in a slow rhythm. I knocked gently. She looked up, startled for a second, then her expression softened. She motioned for me to come in. The room was dim, the blinds half-drawn. Her mother lay motionless except for the faint rise of her chest. Mara's eyes were red, but she didn't cry. She just stared at me for a long moment before handing me her phone. A message glowed on the screen. "Mara, she's not in pain anymore. But the doctors say it's only a matter of time." I didn't know what to say. Words felt useless in that room. I sat beside her, unsure if I should speak, so I didn't. She reached out, resting her hand over mine, fingers trembling slightly. Then she started typing again. She used to sing. When I was little. I don't remember the sound anymore, just the feeling. You know how sound can fill a room? She could do that. Even silence felt full when she sang. She stopped, staring at her mother, then typed. When I lost my hearing, she stopped singing. She said it didn't make sense to sing for someone who couldn't hear. But I always wished she would. I wanted to tell her that maybe her mother had never stopped singing, not really, that maybe the way she held her hand, the way she smiled, the way she watched her daughter breathe, that was her song now. But I didn't say it. I just reached for the small notebook in her bag and wrote, "Maybe she still sings. Just not with sound." She read it, blinked hard, and nodded slowly. We sat there for hours. The room grew darker, the hum of the machine steady like a heartbeat trying to hold on. Occasionally, a nurse would walk in, check the monitors, and leave quietly. At some point, Mara leaned her head against my shoulder. It was a small movement, gentle, tired. I froze, not wanting to break the moment. Her hair smelled faintly of lavender paint. I could feel her breathing, slow, fragile. Then, softly, her mother's hand twitched. Mara straightened immediately, eyes wide. She leaned forward, holding her mother's hand tighter, tears finally breaking free. The old woman's eyes opened just a little. She looked at Mara, then at me, and smiled faintly. Her lips moved, forming a word I couldn't hear. Mara pressed her forehead against her mother's hand, sobbing silently. I wanted to look away but couldn't. The monitor beeped once, then again, slower this time. And then, it stopped. The nurse came in. There was a soft rush of motion, voices, hands, quiet efficiency. But I didn't really see any of it. I just saw Mara, still holding her mother's hand, still crying without sound, her face pale and lost. I stayed until they took her mother away. When the room was finally empty, Mara sat on the bed, staring at the space where her mother had been. Her hands trembled as she reached for the small notebook again. She wrote slowly, the ink smudging in places. Do you ever feel like silence becomes something alive? Like it starts breathing for you when you can't? I nodded. My throat burned. She wrote again. I don't know what to do now. Every sound I remember came from her. I wanted to hold her, to tell her she wasn't alone, but I knew words would fail. So I reached for her hand and just stayed still. No noise, no promises, just presence. She looked at me for a long time, tears shining in her eyes, and then she mouthed, "Thank you." Later, as we walked out of the hospital, the world felt impossibly loud. Car horns, doors slamming, voices, all of it crashed against the fragile quiet between us. She flinched slightly at every sudden sound, as if each one was too sharp, too cruel. I guided her gently toward the street, and we walked without talking. It began to rain again. The kind of rain that doesn't fall, it whispers. She tilted her face toward it, letting the drops trace her skin, and for a second, she looked peaceful. She took out her phone and typed, "This is the only sound I still remember. Rain." I wrote on her screen, "Because it doesn't ask you to listen. It just arrives." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. We reached her building just as the streetlights flickered on. She hesitated at the door, looking at me with that same searching gaze she had the first day we met. Then she typed, "Can you stay? Just for a bit. I don't want the silence to be empty tonight." I nodded. Inside, her apartment felt different. The paintings on the walls seemed quieter somehow, as if they knew what had happened. She sat on the couch, clutching the small notebook her mother used to write in. She turned to a blank page and started sketching. At first, it was just lines. Then shapes began to form, a woman's silhouette dissolving into waves of color. I watched in silence as she painted, her hands trembling, tears falling onto the paper and mixing with the watercolor. When she finished, she held it up. The colors bled together, creating something raw and imperfect but beautiful. At the bottom, she wrote, "Goodbye, Mama." She handed me the notebook without looking. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just held it in my lap, tracing the wet paper with my thumb. Then she leaned against me again, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The only sound was the rain tapping softly on the window. Finally, she lifted her head, wiped her tears, and wrote, "When you lose sound, you start to notice the quiet things. The way someone breathes when they're thinking. The way a heart feels against your hand. You start realizing love has nothing to do with words." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I took the pen, hesitated, and wrote beneath hers, "I think I'm falling for you." She looked at the page. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. She didn't smile. She didn't pull away. She just reached up, touched my face gently, and mouthed, "I know." Then she stood, walked to the window, and signed something small, a slow gesture, graceful, full of meaning I couldn't understand. I wished I knew her language. I wished I could speak to her the way she felt the world. She turned back to me and wrote one last line before closing the notebook, "If you really mean it, learn how to listen the way I do." Then she placed the notebook in my hands and went to her bedroom, the door closing softly behind her. I sat there for a long time, holding that notebook. Rain whispered against the glass. Somewhere, the city hummed in its own rhythm. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely in the quiet. It's strange how time can move both fast and unbearably slow. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, and somewhere between the cracks of passing moments, silence became my teacher. I bought books on sign language. I watched videos late into the night, mimicking shapes with my hands until they made sense. It wasn't easy, nothing truly worth learning ever is. At first, I did it just to feel closer to her, to understand the world she lived in. But then, something changed. The more I learned, the quieter my mind became. I began to realize that silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of everything else we usually miss. 3 months passed before I saw her again. It was a Saturday morning. The city was wrapped in a sleepy haze, the streets washed clean from last night's rain. I stood outside the small art gallery near the corner of 5th and Alder, clutching a folded flyer. Her name was printed at the bottom, Solo Exhibition, The Language of Stillness, by Mara D. My heart stuttered. I hadn't seen her since the night her mother passed. I had sent a few messages, but she never replied. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she wanted me to disappear like everyone else eventually did. But I couldn't. Not this time. The gallery was quiet, almost reverent. Paintings lined the walls, fluid, ethereal, painted in strokes of color that felt alive. Each canvas was signed in the corner with a small symbol, 2 curved lines crossing like waves. And then I saw it. In the center of the room, beneath a soft spotlight, hung a painting unlike the rest. It showed a woman standing in a storm, her hair caught in invisible wind, her mouth open in song, but instead of sound, color poured from her lips. Blues and golds, pinks and grays, colliding midair like rain turning to light. Beneath the painting, a small placard read, "For the sound I still remember." I stood frozen. It was her mother. "Mara painted that one a few weeks ago," said a voice behind me. I turned. It was the gallery owner, an older man with kind eyes. She said it's the last thing she'll ever paint about grief. "Is she here?" I asked quietly. He nodded toward the far corner. She was standing alone, near the back, watching people move through the exhibit. Her hair was a little longer, her eyes softer, but the same sadness lived quietly beneath them. She was wearing a pale blue dress that brushed her knees, simple and beautiful, like everything she did. For a long time, I just watched her. She didn't notice me at first. Then, as if she could feel my gaze, she turned. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise flashing across her face. And then she smiled, small, hesitant, but real. I raised my hand and signed, "Hello." Her eyes flickered with confusion, then shock, and finally, something I couldn't name. She stepped closer, studying my hands. I repeated the sign, slower this time. "Hello." She smiled again, broader now, her eyes glistening. She signed something back, too fast for me to understand. I hesitated, then laughed nervously, shrugging. She covered her mouth, shoulders shaking with silent laughter. Then she signed slower, "You learned." I nodded, my throat tight. I signed back, clumsily, "For you." Her eyes shimmered. For a second, I thought she might cry, but instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It was gentle at first, then desperate, the kind of hug that carries months of words left unsaid. When she pulled back, she gestured for me to follow her outside. We walked into the sunlight, the hum of the city surrounding us like a heartbeat. Across the street, a small cafe spilled warmth through its open doors. She pointed toward it, and I nodded. Inside, the smell of coffee filled the air. She ordered tea, I ordered black coffee, and we sat by the window, the same way we once sat on that bench months ago, 2 strangers lost in a world of noise. She took out her phone and typed, "I didn't think you'd come." I typed back, "I didn't think you'd want me to." She smiled faintly. After my mother died, I couldn't face anyone. Everything sounded too loud, even the quiet. I painted because it was the only thing that didn't hurt. I nodded. She typed again, when I saw you at the hospital, something changed. You didn't try to fill the silence. You let it breathe. That's when I knew you understood me more than anyone else ever did. My fingers trembled slightly as I replied, I missed you every day. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, calm, searching, alive. She didn't type this time. Instead, she raised her hands and signed slowly, carefully, I missed you too. I understood. I didn't need words for that. For a long moment, we just sat there, watching the light shift across the table. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the same notebook, worn, smudged, edges frayed. She opened it to a blank page and placed it between us. Then she wrote, Do you still hear the rain? I smiled. Always. She nodded. Good. Because that's how I remember my mother too. Every time it rains, I hear her. Maybe now you'll hear me too. I stared at her handwriting, at the way her fingers lingered on the page. Then, slowly, I reached for her hand and signed, Can I show you something? She nodded. I placed my hand flat on my chest, then pointed to her. My heart, yours. Her breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes. She reached out, tracing the same gesture back, mine, yours. And in that moment, the noise of the world fell away. The people, the city, the traffic, all of it dissolved into the kind of silence that feels alive. We didn't need sound anymore. The conversation existed in the space between movement and meaning. Every smile, every glance, every breath, all of it spoke louder than words ever could. Later, we walked by the river. The sky was turning gold, the water catching light like glass. She stopped by the railing, hair flickering in the wind, and looked out across the water. Then she signed, slowly, Do you know what I used to dream about when I was a child? I shook my head. She signed, I dreamed of hearing the ocean. But I never did. So I painted it instead. I think art is how I learned to listen. I signed back, maybe love is too. She smiled, small and sad and beautiful all at once. We stood there until the sun dipped below the horizon, the city lights flickering on like stars reborn. And somewhere between the sound of wind and the rhythm of our hearts, I realized something, she had never been silent. The world just hadn't been quiet enough to hear her. As the evening deepened, she turned toward me, eyes glinting under the fading light. Then she took my hands gently, guiding them through a new sign. Her fingers brushed mine softly, shaping the word with deliberate care. Home. I felt it before I understood it. I smiled. Then I signed back, You are mine. She shook her head lightly, a tear slipping free. Then she took my hand, pressed it against her heart and signed again, We are each other's. And that was it. No grand speeches. No music swells. Just the sound of wind through the trees, the quiet hum of a city that had no idea what was unfolding by the riverbank, a love story written entirely in silence. When the first drops of rain began to fall, she looked up, smiling through the mist. I followed her gaze, letting the rain hit my face. The same rain that once carried our grief now felt like a blessing. She reached for my hand one last time, squeezed it and mouthed, Listen. So I did. Not to the world. Not to the noise. But to the silence that now had her name. And for the first time in my life, it was enough.